From the Society of American Archivists student chapter at the University of Alabama, this is Archives and Communities, a podcast highlighting community archiving initiatives and the people behind them.
Hello, my name is Daly, and today I have the pleasure of sharing with you an interview with our fifth guest, Ayshea Kahn, conducted by chapter member Kandi Massey. Ayshea is the Asian Pacific American Community Archivist at the Austin History Center, where she works to document the Asian Pacific American story and educate community members on how to collect and preserve their own family histories. She has also worked with the South Asian American Digital Archive, also known as SAA, for many years collecting oral histories from South Asian American immigrants, and currently serves on their board of directors. After growing up in Georgia, Ayshea received her BS in Cinema and Photography from Ithaca College and later completed an MS in Archival Administration from the University of Texas at Austin. Ayshea begins by describing how learning about her father's Pakistani heritage led her to have an interest in unearthing hidden stories through her work in photography, filmmaking, and eventually archival work.
I was born in Massachusetts. I am a biracial South Asian American. My father is Pakistani and my mom is white. And we, when I was really young, moved down to Georgia. So that's kind of where I grew up. And when I was growing up, I didn't really get to see many reflections of my own identity and sort of in my school and kind of the things that we were learning in the classroom. You know, there was just very little about South Asian American history. And this sort of coupled with my father kind of being the only family member of in the United States, the rest of his family being abroad, I also had really limited access to my own family history on my father's side. And I think this kind of experience really developed like a curious nature in me and trying to put those pieces back together for me personally, and always kind of striving to amplify other people's voices who didn't see themselves represented. So I ended up going to Ithaca College for undergrad, where I focused on photography and filmmaking, and kind of thought at that time that my career path would kind of lead towards documentary studies, but also working with young people, cultivating their own sort of skills as storytellers and filmmakers. And so that's what brought me to Austin, where I live today. I've been in Austin for about 10 years. And I moved to Austin originally to take a job at the Austin Film Society, teaching middle school and high school students how to make films while also working as an assistant editor on different documentary projects. And that's kind of where I first got interested in archival research and just archives in general.
The second question Kandi asks Ayshea is about her current position and professional path.
I currently work as the Asian Pacific American Community Archivist at the Austin History Center. The Austin History Center is the historic division of the Austin Public Library System. We were started in 1955 as just a small vertical file on Austin and Travis County history. And our local collection just grew over time and ended up taking over the whole building that it was our first central library branch. The Austin History Center, again, has focus on local history, providing the public with information about history, current events, and activities of Austin and Travis County. And we work to collect and preserve information about local government, business, longtime community members and institutions, as well as the neighborhoods of our city, so that generations to come have access to our local history. And I came to the History Center. It was a long and winding path. As I mentioned before, I came to Austin to pursue filmmaking, and through my nonfiction filmmaking work, began to do a lot of archival acquisitions work and research. And it just got me more curious about the archive and how it operated. I didn't really do too much archival research when I was an undergrad. And that kind of coupled with getting a little tired of the gig economy that the film industry really operates on, I was also kind of thinking of a career change. So while I was continuing my other jobs, I started to volunteer at the Texas Archive of the Moving Image, which is a community-based nonprofit archive that's based in Austin, but crisscrosses the state of Texas to collect amateur and home movies and other ephemeral films. And they have a free digitization program where if you donate your films for digitization, they'll do that free of charge as long as they can keep an archival copy of their archive. So I started volunteering with them, learning about audiovisual preservation and archiving. And their executive director, Carolyn Frick, worked at UT Austin, teaching classes in both the radio, television, film department, but also their School of Information, which inspired me to then apply and attend graduate school at that school, where I focused on archival management and preservation, but also took other courses in information architecture. I was really interested in digital libraries and digital archiving. And so I really took that time in graduate school to kind of explore and talk to different kinds of people and see what kind of opportunities were out there. When I finished graduate school, I got a job at a film production company working as their in-house archivist and researcher. So I was developing archival workflows for the film production company, and then also doing additional research for the films that they were producing, again, documentary films and that kind of thing. And I just wasn't really feeling fed in the same way that I thought I would be. And I was working, predominantly in a white organization, and a lot of the topics that the production company was choosing to focus on were predominantly white narratives. And it just didn't feel like the right environment for me. And so when I saw that they had a posting at the Austin History Center for an Asian Pacific American community archivist, I just kind of felt something stir inside of me, and just took a chance and applied for the position. And that's why I always tell people that even if you feel like you may not be qualified, just take the chance to go through the application process, because taking on that position as the APA community archivist has really been transformational for me. And I've been in that position for just over 3 years. The community archivist program started in 2000 and strives to provide historical recognition and representation for the lives and experiences of Austin's diverse communities. And we do this by intentionally documenting African American, Latinx, and Asian Pacific American communities in Austin and Travis County. These positions were first created as neighborhood liaisons. So the emphasis was really on identifying people who had deep community trust with the communities that we were looking to document and sort of develop our collections around, and then kind of evolved into a more professionalized archivist title over time. In my position, the Asian Pacific American Community Archivist position was created in 2006. And my areas of work can kind of be divided into providing reference services, collection development and archival processing. But a huge part of my work is community engagement and education. So pre-pandemic, probably 50 to 70% of my time was spent outside of the archive, just building relationships and getting to learn Austin's diverse and vibrant Asian Pacific American communities.
Ayshea then dives deeper into what community archiving means and the importance of documenting communities authentically.
I think for me, community archiving occurs when the community that you're interested in documenting has a really active role, and I think ideally leading the ways that their own history is collected, told, described, and accessed by the outside communities. I think of a phrase that was really popularized by the disability justice movement, nothing about us without us, and just really hitting home this idea of like, we need the expertise of Black, Indigenous, people of color, trans, queer, and disabled community members to document them authentically. I didn't mention this before, but really what inspired me and motivated me towards a career in community archives was when I was in graduate school, I interacted heavily with the South Asian American Digital Archive, also known as SAA-UA. SAA-UA was started in 2008 and was co-founded by Sameep Malik and Michelle Caswell. And their mission really is to create a more inclusive society by giving voice to South Asian Americans and really empowering them to document, preserve, and share their own stories. And SAA-UA is innovative in so many ways, but especially has these participatory storytelling projects through their website. And so when I was in graduate school, I came across their First Days project, which is an online website that collects micro oral histories of immigrants' first days in the United States. And you could reach out to them and be a reporter for the project. And so I was able to help record oral histories for that project. And also got to be connected with their executive director, Sameep, to learn more about how SAA-UA was formed and how it's evolved over time. And just interacting with that organization has been transformational for me in so many ways. It was the first time that I really saw myself and my own sort of complex identity reflected in an archive. And it was the first time that I even learned about nuanced South Asian American historical narratives. And that was so powerful and healing for me personally that I knew I wanted to always be connected to this kind of work, so that younger generations could have that moment much, much younger, because I think that it's infuriating that I went until graduate school to learn some of these really important histories. So that was foundational in terms of leading me to community archiving work.
Ayshea then gives us a closer look at her work with the Asian Pacific American Community Archive and SAA-UA.
The Asian Pacific American Community Archive at the History Center, as I mentioned before, started in 2006. And I guess I could back up just a little bit by saying the whole idea of the Community Archivist program at the Austin History Center really came about in 2000 in response to community outcry that, the History Center was sort of following suit with a lot of predominantly white archival institutions where, that the archival collections and collecting priorities was really emphasizing and uplifting the narratives of middle and upper class white communities in Austin and Travis County. And as a local archival repository that says that we are documenting the whole community. We should really be doing more to not only diversify our collections, but our paid staff and just operate more with a racial equity lens. And so it really was done through community organizing that these 3 positions were created. And so my position was created in 2006, and Esther Chung Martin was the first community archivist in that position. She really laid the foundation by, working with longtime Chinese and Southeast Asian community members and doing a lot of collecting and community building work with them. When she started, there were, I don't know, like you could count on one hand the number of collections we had from the Asian American community. And so when I came in 3 years ago, she really had developed that collection quite a bit. Things that I have been focusing on in my position have been sort of diversifying the South Asian American voices in our collections, and also really focusing on family archiving workshops, really just empowering our Asian American communities to preserve their own stories and really see that work is important. And so leading workshops on how to come up with a plan to preserve your family history and going over different technical aspects of that work has been something that I've done a lot of, especially during the pandemic when we can't, it's been harder to see our families in person. Doing these virtual workshops allows family members to hop on Zoom if they're able, and kind of share their family stories virtually across the web. Let's see. And so I do now currently serve as a member of the board of directors of SAA-UA as well. So I've been really lucky to continue my work with them and really amplify their mission and vision, especially their Archival Creators Fellowship, which is a great community-driven initiative that provides paid stipends for South Asian community members who are not only South Asian, but members of communities that are traditionally underrepresented within the South Asian communities. So lower caste communities, for example, queer and trans, indentured laborers, these kinds of narratives that even when we talk about South Asian American history, these voices can often be lost. And so SAA-UA has developed a fellowship that really is helping amplify those kinds of voices, and also kind of connecting back to what stories are being told in the classroom. SAA-UA is just about to launch and make widely available its very first textbook publication called Our Stories, which is completely dedicated to the varied histories of South Asian Americans living in the United States. And we're really hoping that book can make its way into classrooms and libraries, as well as homes all across the country.
Kandi then asks Ayshea to describe more about the family history workshops she has done with the Asian Pacific American community in Austin.
It's been going really well. I think, especially as I mentioned, over the past, since the pandemic hit, not only has it been harder for us to see our families in person, but we've also really seen a surge in anti-Asian racism and violence and harassment. And so I think in response to that, there has been a real need for community healing and reconnecting to our histories and sort of sharing these stories to make it really visible that this kind of violence isn't new for our communities. It's something that our elders have experienced. Really just, I think family archiving can be just a way to come together and kind of go through that healing process as a family. Virtually, it is a little harder to do, but we have been able to bring not only myself, but I always love to collaborate as a community. So having multiple voices sharing on different topics related to archival preservation, maybe storytelling and oral histories. And then another huge component of my work that I've been focusing on is language accessibility and coming up with models that make these kinds of workshops accessible for our Asian senior community. So the most recent family archiving workshop I did was in partnership with a senior program at our Asian American Resource Center, which is another city entity in Austin. And we were able to do over Zoom a family archiving workshop with the members of that senior program who mostly speak Mandarin. So we were able to facilitate an interpreter to be available on site to provide consecutive interpretation. We were able to get a lot of our, family archiving 101 documents translated in different Asian languages so that they could interact with the material. And then also just sort of showing, we have like a preservation station at the History Center with like test collection items, just kind of showing that kind of material up to the camera to show them different examples. Another thing that we did with that program that was really exciting was sending mini archival kits to each of the participants. So a lot of our senior community members are often homebound and have limited transportation options. So we were able to partner with the city's transportation services that the Resource Center provides to deliver small Hollinger boxes with acid-free folders, a few photo sleeves, pair of white gloves, as well as those translated resource documents so that they could start to think about what they would want to put in a box like that, what kind of histories they want to prioritize. And they really enjoyed that and was receptive to that. And I would just like to give a shout out to the Community-Driven Archives program at Arizona State University, sort of led by Nancy Godoy, because that was the seed idea for those archival starter kits. They do a very similar program. And so I was really inspired by Nancy's work, and she's been a huge inspiration and sort of mentor to me as a friend.
Kandi concludes the interview by asking Ayshea for suggestions for students who may be interested in getting involved in community archival work.
I think as students that are interested in community archiving work, I think that, trying, if your program isn't offering archival coursework with a racial equity lens, really try to maybe diversify the courses you're taking by maybe taking courses in critical race theory or ethnic studies or gender studies, so that you can really have a stronger grasp or understanding of how to approach these communities after graduate school. And I always recommend that people identify mentors early on in their program. I cold emailed SAA when I found that archive to see if I could be involved in their first days project. And now Samip has been a longtime mentor, collaborator, and friend, and is a huge part of why I'm at the History Center and in my role as the Asian Pacific American Community Archivist. I know that conferences can be expensive. Like pre-pandemic, they were very expensive to attend, but maybe trying to identify maybe regional conferences tend to be more affordable and can be a great way to get connected to a broader archival community and kind of get a sense of maybe what kind of community archiving initiatives are taking place in your region. Might be more accessible if you can't afford to do more the national level conferences. And then I think in general, just something that I've learned a lot just in my role as at the History Center over the 3 years is that it really is slow work. And I think sometimes we are pushed to act very quickly and act with this false sense of urgency and that everything has to be done as fast as you can. And you have to do all of the things all of the time. And I think when you're doing community archiving, you're community building, and that requires a lot of intentionality and trust, and listening very carefully. And that can take a long time for that to happen. So I think always just advocating for a little more time when you feel like you don't understand, or if you need to do more learning. I think that we could all really benefit from that. And I think that's what really helps when building sort of community relationships and doing that kind of work.
We'd like to give a special thanks to Ayshea for taking the time to meet with us and for sharing the unique experiences and perspectives that have led to her successful career in community archives. If you have any questions for Ayshea, feel free to reach out to her at aysheak@utexas.edu. Until next time, thanks for listening to Archives and Communities.
This was an episode of Archives and Communities, the official podcast of the Society of American Archivists student chapter at the University of Alabama. Opinions expressed in this podcast are not reflective of a particular institution. Thank you for listening and join us again next time.